both defending against the critical point and pressure surrounding the d5 square. So we've discussed that a chain structure can be reached, the exchange structure can be reached, and finally, Karol-Slav structure, which is actually a structure that occurs from many other mainline openings, we'll call it the classical French structure for this case, can occur if white simply chooses to develop and defend the e4 pawn, either with knight to c3 or knight to d2. Either one of these moves can be met by captures on e4, after which we have a structure where white has two potentially more advanced pawns in the center gaining space. However, black has a very solid structure and will typically try to strike eventually with either the move c5 or e5, as well as combining that with plans of putting pressure against the open d pawn that is now a target along the open d file, the semi-open file for black. So those are the mainline pawn structures that can occur from this opening. To talk quickly about the 5 mainline opening variations, we'll give them names now that we've talked about the structures and the general plans. We're going to outline it quickly for you with the names. So e5 itself is the advanced variation of the French, and after c5, c3, queen to b6, white typically plays knight f3, and now after the move knight to c6, black is exerting pressure against the pawn, and white has a few different ways of play here. One of them is, and the most popular one, is to move a3, with the idea being to play b4, trying to eliminate some of the pressure that black has on this focal point c5. In doing so, he hopes that he can then refocus his efforts to be completely on the king side. Why would a3 and b4 be a necessary plan for that? Well, if you don't somehow eliminate some of black's pressure here, it's very hard to develop this bishop because of the protection it needs on the b-pawn. And if it's hard to develop the bishop, it's also hard to develop the knight, as bringing him to a3 is a sideline square on the edge of the board, and d2 would block the queen's protection of this pawn. So you see that white has trouble developing the pieces if he doesn't try to eliminate some of black's pressure. Another mainline move would be something like bishop e2, just developing and dealing with those things later on, the things we highlighted on the queen side, or even the move bishop d3, with the idea of retreating it back to c2. Noted should be that black cannot capture and win this pawn immediately, as at the end of this variation, white has a discovered check against the king, unleashing the queen's attack against the undefended black queen on d4. That, you have it, is the highlighted, most basic variations of the advanced variation of the French. Next, we'll talk about the exchange. As I already said, there isn't much more to add about this except that the structure itself doesn't have very much pull. It's usually a weapon played when white wants to have positions with little losing chances in regards to black having some sort of dynamic play. A very dry cut position. Not to say that neither side can win, just that it's more dry positions and not the most exciting thing. And you know what? I don't really like discussing unexciting positions, so I'm not going to give you much more information on that line than I've already given you. So the winner work can occur after knight to c3, which is interesting because if black doesn't choose to capture and play the classical, the move bishop b4, e5, c5, a3 heads us into a position that you'll notice looks very strikingly similar to the advanced variation, with one critical difference. White's queen side is much weaker in regards to the pawn structure because, unlike the position before where white had the same sort of pawn chain, his pawns were not doubled yet and a little bit more cohesive. In this situation, black will have more targets on the queen side, potentially the weak c3 pawn and the isolated a pawn. Well, what did white gain in return for this further weakened queen side? The lacking of black's dark squared bishop on the king side tends to promote even more aggressive attacking chances for white. After moves such as knight e7, for example, the move 7 queen to g4 is actually the most popular move in this position, immediately exerting pressure against this weak square and tending to bring all of the pieces with full force over to the king side and checkmate black where he stands. So the winner is one of the most imbalanced and sharp lines of the French. After the moves, both knight to c3 and knight to d2, the other option, as I said, is to take. And after knight f6, bishop g5, bishop e7, takes, we've reached a mainline classical variation of the French, with another popular move for black being the move knight b to d7 here. Finally, the Tarrasch French, after knight to d2, if black chooses not to take, he can play knight f6. Noted should be that the winner will move bishop b4. Wouldn't make sense here, as the move c3 would simply attack the bishop and unpin the knight. And after the move knight f6, e5, knight to d7, something like f4 being popular, you can reach positions that are sort of similar to the pawn chain you reach in an advance or a winnower, with one major difference being that white has gained extra time for this move f4. However, in doing so, he's also neglected his own development slightly, and therefore black has gained a small amount of an initiative, or let's say more developed pieces toward the queen side. Noted should be the knight maneuver I just did there, that I didn't play the knight to d2 in order to develop this guy to f3. I intend to bring this guy to f3 so that both of my knights can work together in cohesion in terms of defending the critical point d4. Well, that's it, everybody. The French just got rocked in your face, camel cake. Hope you enjoy it. Chew on that.